Welcome. My name is Bob Tickleman. I'm a Principal Microsoft Technical Trainer. I'm excited to be your guide for module number 4, Explore Microsoft Graph, part of the Authentication and Authorization module of the AZ-204 course. I find myself talking more about Microsoft Graph these days, mainly because of M365 Copilot, but it's something that's been around for decades. Microsoft Graph is the API set that's available across the entire Microsoft data estate. Now, what does that mean? Every single one of the Microsoft products, whether it be Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneDrive, Teams, whether it be SharePoint, all of these products that we've made available have always had this thing called the Microsoft Graph, which is the connective tissue across this data communication structure of all of our products. Have you ever wondered how when you're in a Teams meeting, that if you open it up and you start a Teams meeting with somebody, if they try and send you an email and they put your name in the to line, they're part of your corporation, it would indicate that you're actually maybe busy. So all of that information, that communication is all made available through the Microsoft Graph. And so we want to introduce this to you as a tool that you might be able to use to communicate and build into your application the usage of the Microsoft Graph and all of the information available to you. Now, as I said, I do a lot of this these days, mainly talking about Copilot and specifically M365 Copilot. M365 Copilot not only has access to the trained information of the LLM that we are using, it has access to the Microsoft Graph. And so without having to have you upload data and files that are secure in your environment, it actually has access to the Microsoft Graph to gain access to that shared information that you already have access to, making your application use much more significant and more impactful because it's going to ground information and responses based on your data and not just trained data. So there's an example of using Microsoft Graph in an app, in this case Copilot, to gain access to a mountain of information that is very, very useful for you. And for me, I find out stuff I didn't even know I had access. In the past, it was always up to me to be able to go find a file and maybe use that as part of my solution that I'm putting together. Or even if I could upload it, it would be up to me to find it. I find stuff using Microsoft Graph. As long as I have access to it, it's actually part of the query and the results that I'm going to use in my Copilot use in M365. So this is the gateway into that data estate that I'm talking about across the entire Microsoft data estate world, and you can gain access to it through the M365 solutions that you're working with. And so what you're seeing here is now you can build applications that can query information. Now, some of it might require to have proper calendar hygiene, for example, that if I were to try and have a response to something, I might query to make sure that the person is even available. Maybe they're away on vacation. Now, again, that required them to be able to put their vacation time properly in their calendar. But if I could query their calendar and I had access to it, I could find out that they're not available to me. So all of this information, as I said, is going to be made available to the Microsoft Graph. I want to go there and actually show it to you so you can see some of these APIs. So by going to graph.microsoft.com, there's a wealth of information here that if you're new to this, there's tutorials, there's documentation, there's an entire Graph Explorer to figure out what the APIs are. And there's even usages and sample code that you can work with, but you can come through and see the entire Microsoft ecosystem of Edge and Excel, groups, identity access and management, looking at Microsoft Teams, looking at the Microsoft To-Do app. So if it is a Microsoft app, we have access to all of the APIs to get information. So here is your ability that you can now use it. And the benefit about this graph is it incorporates the authentication that you already have. So it's going to be based around the entire ecosystem, but if I don't have access to it, it's not going to give me access to information. So maybe it's going to give me access to a team shared location, but there's maybe things that are shared between myself and my manager that I would have access to that aren't shared with other team members because they're not part of the permission set to be able to see that shared document between myself and my manager. So this is just that example in the context of the module we're looking at of authentication and authorization. So you're seeing at the bottom of the slide, the Microsoft Identity Provider is providing that security to the access to the graph data that is in place already. You don't have to build it. You just have to access the APIs and know that the MSOL libraries that are built into it are going to then take the authentication requirements that you already have. Instead of having to you bake them in them, they're going to be part of that solution itself. So to be able to query the Microsoft Graph, you can see that the call looks very similar to what we had with the SAS tokens. It's going to call the graph.microsoft.com. It's going to call the resource and the parameters that you're looking for. And because the MSOL libraries are built into it, we're going to be able to now have the authentication and the authorization. And the Microsoft Graph SDKs are integrated with the MSOL libraries, so you can build your application on top of this graph environment. All you have to access is the Microsoft Graph SDK, and its access to the MSOL libraries and the Graph APIs are going to be made available to you. So it provides that front end capability. One of the things about the Microsoft Graph client is you can make it exist for the lifetime of that access to the client. So it's not like it's every single new feature. So if I make a call to Graph and I have my authentication, I could keep that authentication through my usage of that application. So if you build an application that allows me to query some information, it's not like it's going to have to constantly come back and ask me to authenticate. You can have it every time I use it. And for the use of that application, it can make it available for the lifetime of my use of that application. Looking at some of the best practices, these follow along. Our standard best practices is that you always want to make sure that you're authenticating a user account before they use it or require them to have been authenticated. You want to make sure that you're using the correct protocols. You want to make sure that the existing permissions that are already in place, and that becomes part of the biggest challenge, especially as we start using things, as I said, like Copilot, that Copilot will not cause a security issue using the Microsoft Graph, but it sure as heck will expose one. So make sure that the data governance and compliance and security are already in place on the objects in the graph, because your use of the graph will then just take the user's permissions and give them access to that information. It's not a separate security layer. It uses the permissions. The line we like to use is it honors the governance, compliance, and security that is already in place in your organization. Picking up on some of the other features, like you're having access that is stored in a safe, secure location inside of the Microsoft, whether it be Teams or whether it be in SharePoint. You want to make sure that you're not copying that information and storing it in a local location, potentially thereby exposing it. You may want to make sure wherever possible to keep it and use it from the stored location where it was originally kept. So let's go off and do a lab now where we're going to get in and play with the Microsoft Graph.
In this lab, we're going to create a .NET application to authenticate with Microsoft Enter ID and request an access token, then call the Microsoft Graph API to retrieve and display your user profile information. Let's get into this. I want to register an app and create a new app registration, give it a name. Run my local host, and then register. The application client ID and the directory tenant information. I'm in Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to create a project locally. I'm going to add some packages for Azure.Identity, Microsoft.Graph, and .env.net. What I want to do now is edit the env file. What I need to do is put in the tenant ID and the application ID. Okay, I'm going to add my code to the application. So what I've done in here is I've got my project running. I've got my program.cs file. It's got my application. I've got my .env that has my tenant and my application ID. Let's go ahead and run this. It's going to ask for authentication to the directory. And it'll come back. We can see that it's retrieved the user profile information, display name. That completes the lab. Let's go back to the recording.
Okay, welcome back from the lab. Let's close out our module with our knowledge check. Question number 1. Which HTTP method is used to update a resource with a new value? It's the patch method that is used to update the values. Question number 2. Which of the components of the Microsoft 365 platform is used to deliver data external to Azure into Microsoft Graph services and applications? Go ahead and pause the screen for a minute. It's the Microsoft Graph connector that provides these connections to the Microsoft data estate that you're working with. There are other third-party connectors that you can have and even build your own to extend the Microsoft Graph to take other data that might not be natively plumbed into the Microsoft 365 Graph as it comes from Microsoft. So that closes out the module for the Microsoft Graph, understanding what it is and how I might be able to use it. And it's up to you to come up with creative ideas to gain access to that information existing in your organization and being able to leverage application development using that information. Remember that it's not just for the Microsoft Graph data that already exists. You can build custom connectors or take third-party connectors that exist and use them to pipe into the Microsoft Graph and execute it. Microsoft Graph by itself does not implement a security protocol. It honors the governance, compliance, and security that's already in place. And it wraps itself around the MSOL libraries that you can now provide that authentication and then provide the authorization that is already in place on those objects. It's just the graph that gives you access to them. This is also the closeout to the entire learning path where we looked at authentication and authorization in all of its cases. We saw that as we move to the cloud, there's fundamentally a change in the foundation of authentication itself. In the past, in the on-premises world, we relied heavily on Kerberos and NTLM. These legacy technologies have been around for decades and have served us well, but they themselves had some fundamental flaws that while we could patch them and update them, we wanted to take a look, and it's just not we, Microsoft, we as an industry wanted to find a new way to provide in this new cloud environment, a cloud-native, cloud-first protocol. And it's with that that we came up with the protocols of OpenID, OData, OAuth, and WSFed that are the foundation of a new set of authentication processes that are available not just from Microsoft, but across all cloud providers. Working with these new identities, we now have Microsoft Entra ID that provides for identities on a broader range than what we've had in the past. We've got the legacy components of user accounts and groups and devices, and we've expanded that to now include not just regular domain joined devices that are Windows. We now have a whole range of devices such as iOS devices and Android devices from a mobile world. We've got access to Mac devices and Linux devices that we can work with, really embracing the BYOD in this new modern world we work with. We've also expanded the number of identities, working with not just service principals. We've got managed identities where applications and these system assigned and user assigned managed identities provide for a new world in which we can now assign and easily maintain and control access to microservices and applications so that they themselves can have their own identities that were bred for them specifically for this use, making it easier to manage and our applications more secure. And that allows for this whole idea of identity being the new perimeter of security. So it's not just the identity of a user using an application. The application itself can have its own identity, and that in concert with a user account can now be shaped to meet the requirements of your organization. Thanks very much for joining me in this security journey. I look forward to seeing you in another recording.